Well, so we've got people just, a few more people getting seated here.
Louder.
Louder? Okay.
Yeah, there.
Thank you. So welcome to our panel this evening. A special welcome to our Board of Trustees who are here this week meeting, and I really appreciate them taking time out of their busy schedule to be here. And welcome to all of our community members who are actually experiencing a little bit of cold this week, which is, new this winter. And welcome to our alumni, to all of our faculty, staff, and students. Thank you so much for being here tonight. As we get started, just want to remind everyone that Carroll seeks to provide a campus intellectual environment that encourages the pursuit of truth, critical thinking, responsible decision-making, civil debate, and respectful dialogue. Carroll College neither disagrees or agrees with the views expressed, but rather provides a forum so that each person attending may hear, contemplate, and discuss the ideas and opinions presented. Especially important as we talk about this very timely topic tonight. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Catherine Greiner, who is our moderator this evening. She is an associate professor of theology and our interim dean of mission for faculty and academics. Dr. Greiner.
Thank you, Dr. Glowinka. Thank you all for being here. Just a few announcements for the comfort and safety of our audience, especially for our visitors. Bathrooms are located outside of the east entrance, where most of you entered, and AED and fire extinguishers are located near the bathrooms as well. Should there be an evacuation, please exit the same way you came in, through the east staircase or out the east doors, and around the corner to the north exit. You really have to know your directions, but people will be here to direct you. And thank you to Jay Nelson and his team, who is our Director of Campus Security and Public Safety. They really have helped us welcome all of you here this evening. Let us begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, fill us with your wisdom this evening. Mindful of the values we hold dear at Carroll College, we ask you to open our minds and hearts as we listen to our speakers tonight. May we listen with empathy and generosity. Enkindle in us a desire to learn and grow in our efforts to work for justice and peace and for the greater good of our communities. Accompany us in our common pilgrimage with all people of goodwill to seek the ultimate truth and ultimate good. We ask this in your most holy name. Amen. Amen. In the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. As Dr. Glowinka said, I am Catherine Greiner, and I have the honor this evening of serving as our moderator for our panel on immigration law and Catholic social teaching. This educational event has been about 5 months in the making. And it is right that we have this panel at this time, when we need it more than ever, when we need to engage in constructive, informed discussion about challenging issues, especially in light of the growing tensions, violence, confusion, and pain that has been experienced all over our nation the first weeks of 2026, particularly in Minneapolis. We are very blessed to have 4 esteemed panelists who will offer us their expertise, their wisdom and experience on immigration and on Catholic social teaching. And I know we will all learn a lot from each of them. Our program will go like this. Each panelist will have about 10 to 12 minutes to share their remarks. And after our final speaker, I will ask our panelists a series of prepared questions that we have received from students. Towards the end of the evening, we hope to take a few questions from the audience, and we will conclude at 8:30, maybe 8:33, but no later. We will conclude with a blessing from Bishop Vedder. And now, let me introduce our esteemed panelists. Dr. Alex Street is an associate professor of political science and co-director of the Honors Scholars Program here at Carroll College. I'm the other co-director. I didn't expect that. Dr. Street will offer us some of the historical and political context of immigration law and policy in the United States. Bishop Austin Vedder is Bishop of the Diocese of Helena and currently serving as co-president of Carroll College alongside Dr. Glowinka. Bishop Vedder will talk about immigration in light of Catholic social teaching. Ms. Andrea Sweeney is an attorney based in Missoula who specializes in family-based immigration and U.S. immigration law. She is the founder and legal director of Big Sky Immigration, Legal Services and Advocacy. Ms. Sweeney will share her experience and expertise regarding the nuances and complexities of the immigration legal system. Mr. Dagim Degaro is a recent graduate of Carroll College, originally from Ethiopia. Mr. Degaro currently works in the Office of Institutional Advancement here at Carroll, and he is going to share his personal story and his experience navigating the U.S. immigration system. And now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Street.
I don't know, I was having trouble seeing.
Oh, okay.
Easier to see.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Hi, everyone, thanks. Can you yell at me if it's not loud enough? Somebody yell at me? That's okay. Whoa. Megan, I need to speak up?
Yeah, that's good. It's okay.
It's okay. All right. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I am really going to have to try and race here to get through. I'm trying to provide some background. What I hope to do is provide some context for the laws and the history that led us to where we are. I think it's worth understanding where we are. There's a lot of controversy around immigration at the moment. And I have the particular goal of trying to understand something that I think is kind of puzzling, which is that on the one hand, we have a president who was elected just a year and a half ago, on a platform of restricting immigration and deporting a lot of unauthorized immigrants. And now he's doing that, and it's turning out to be quite unpopular. So how do we have that combination? Somebody who said what he was going to do, got elected, now he's trying to do it, and now actually trying to do it is, in large parts of the country, quite unpopular. That seems to me kind of puzzling. It seems something that's worth understanding, and I think it helps us understand the wider set of issues that we have around immigration in this country. So, to do that, I'm going to give you a way too brief history of US immigration laws. Let's go. First 100 years, nothing, roughly speaking. Because the North and the South couldn't agree on things like citizenship and westward expansion, whether new states would be slave states or non-slave states. That meant they couldn't agree on issues around immigration and citizenship. And so those are, to a large extent, left undefined in the US Constitution, and then also not really acted upon for roughly 100 years. That was settled by the Civil War. right? So at that point, suddenly we get some changes, the north winds, and we start getting some of the first immigration restrictions at the federal level. These immigration restrictions were motivated by resentments against immigrants. And this is a pattern that recurs in US history and recurs in lots of other countries as well. In the West, there was resentment of Chinese immigrants who were coming in, working in the railroads and mining, and the response was to have a law that tried to entirely restrict immigration from China. And then on the eastern seaboard, there was, as many of us know, around the year 1900, that's more or less the high point in the previous wave of immigration to the US. And it was somewhat Western European, but starting to shift towards Southern and Eastern Europe, more and more Catholics and Jews. And those were also groups that were unpopular in large parts of the country. That's part of why we have Catholic colleges and universities, is because Catholics and other minority groups were discriminated against. And so we get these building immigrant resentments and a sense that we need to limit immigration. And the approach that was taken, this was also a time when there was a lot of fairly explicitly racial ideology. There was ideas around white supremacy. Scientists were even trying to measure people's skulls and tell from their size of their faces how intelligent they were. And so these were racially motivated to a large extent. And the final response was what was called the national origins system from the 1920s that tried to limit immigration to the US mostly to Northern and Western Europeans by putting caps that reflected census data from 2 or 3 decades before that, when the country had more Northern and Western European immigrants. And these were explicitly anti-Catholic, anti-Irish, I mean to some extent anti-Irish, but especially anti Southern and Eastern Europe. That was the system, and then in combination with the Great Depression and World War II, that really did restrict immigration. Right? On its own, it would have done as well, but the Great Depression and World War II really shut off immigration. And so by the 1950s, this wave of immigrants that we'd had was subsiding, and the US was down to having around 6% foreign-born, having peaked at about 13% around the year 1920. We're now, incidentally, back up around 13% foreign-born. So, but this system wasn't stable either. The civil rights movement and post-war immigration, labor shortages, pushed, and also advocacy on the part of groups that had been excluded, like so these Jewish and Italian, Southern Eastern European minorities were advocating to be able to sponsor more of their family members to come and join them. And so there was a real sense, there was quite a lot of pressure against this kind of Northern European biased racial national origin system. So we got the thing called the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, and that created the 3 tracks for legal immigration we more or less still have now. Family sponsorship is one of the big ones, employer sponsorship, and then the smaller, I'm lumping some things together, but there's some space for humanitarian immigration, there's some diversity programs that are meant to address some of the restrictions and the exclusions that have been put in place under the previous system. Which, for example, there was something called the Asiatic Barred Zone. They had entirely limited no immigration whatsoever from a huge chunk of Southern and Eastern Asia. So, there was a sense that that was not really compatible with the US trying to do well in the Cold War and present itself as the land of the free and all this kind of thing. So, okay, so they got rid of that. We moved to this new system. And this has changed a bit, but this is more or less the system for legal immigration that we still have now. Family sponsorship, employer sponsorship, and then some smaller things around humanitarian and other diversity programs. So, but this system fairly quickly started to run into conflict with the sociology and the economics of immigration. One of the ways it did that was that the first time under this system, there had previously been no limits on immigration from the Western Hemisphere, right? So that's the Americas. Even under this national origin system, it just hadn't been an issue. There was barely any, and so there was no limits. In the meantime, though, there had developed a system, especially around the time of the Second World War, labor shortages. There had developed a system, and some of it was a program the US government was actively recruiting because of the labor shortages. There was a system of seasonal migration around the southern border, in California, in the Southwest, in Texas, where immigrants were coming and often working seasonally in things like agriculture, but then going back and then coming and going back. And the problem was that these caps on Western Hemisphere immigration kind of made a bunch of that illegal, and a lot of employers and immigrants basically just kept on doing it anyway, and local politicians mostly wanted to look the other way because it had become an important part of the economy. So we kind of illegalized an existing pattern of seasonal immigration, and for a while it wasn't super controversial, it wasn't even really an issue. It actually became more of an issue when we started seeing another kind of wave of anti-immigrant sentiment, and that led to a lot of politicians promising that they were going to really secure the border. Starting in the 80s and 90s, that's when we first see these militaristic operations called Operation Gatekeeper, Operation Hold the Line, were both big administrative efforts under the Clinton administration, and they were building massive fences, barbed wire, hiring a lot more border patrol people, and kind of moving towards like a much tougher stance on the border. That had what was probably the unintended effect of cutting off that seasonal immigration, but not only in the like, oh, but they all stay over their way, also some people were like, well, okay, then I'm going to stay in the US. Particularly people who had formed ties to the US, which tends to happen. This is mostly material for another class, but sometimes when a man meets a woman and you know all that kind of thing, and then they have children, and suddenly you've got children in America, and even though it's now legal, like you may not leave, right? Like that is a big important part of the history of immigration is that people move and then they, all that kind of stuff. So we have this border symbolism, very good politics, but not good policy. It kind of traps a bunch of people in this illegal status. And then the third big way in which the system we have has gotten out of line with the reality of immigration is that the world does have systems, in particular a system for humanitarian immigration, but it's much more limited than you might think. What we have is basically the refugee system, but you can only get recognized as a refugee if you're being politically persecuted. It's not for just poverty, it's not just for environmental damage or whatever. Still, there are a lot of people who probably qualify, they've been chased out of their country by wars. The problem is there's way, way too many of them. There's something like 40 million people recognized by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees as refugees living outside of their countries, often in camps. 40 million is a lot. The US over the last couple of decades has mostly accepted around 70,000 a year, which is more than a lot of countries. But still, it doesn't put a dent really in a number like 40 million. And so some of those people end up saying, okay, I'm not going to wait until I've been recognized as a refugee. I'm going to go to the country where I want to be recognized as a refugee and apply for asylum. So that's the difference between being already recognized as a refugee and being an asylum seeker. The problem with that is you mostly can't get to those richer countries through legal means. Like you can't get a visa to go to those countries, right? Because they're like, no, we don't give visas to lots of people. It's very hard to get a visa if you're from a much poorer country, which is where a lot of this is coming from. So that kind of blurs together this humanitarian system that we, to a limited extent, have for the world with illegal immigration. So we've got this blurring of illegal immigration and humanitarian immigration. We've got this trap where people have been stuck on the wrong side of a border that's increasingly dangerous to cross. And then we also have the legacy of this system of seasonal migration, which is not as big a deal as it was, but in the 80s and 90s, there was still quite a lot of seasonal immigrants from Mexico, for example. That's mostly died up now. Now what we have is much more asylum seekers from all over the world. So, this gives us what we have today, which is a large unauthorized immigrant population, 10 to 12 million people, but they're here. They've been here, a lot of them for decades. A lot of them have all sorts of social and economic ties. There's something like 6 million US citizen children who have at least one undocumented parent, unauthorized, whatever. We'll talk about the language a little bit. A lot of people who study this stuff, I think unauthorized is maybe the term that I prefer, unauthorized immigration. We get scared of using the word illegal because it seems there's a risk of kind of oversimplifying and kind of placing blame on what is a very complicated situation. A lot of people are doing things that for a lot of US history would have been legal. Or they were originally legal immigrants, but then they've been, in some cases, the policy has changed and literally made them illegal when they're already in the US. In other cases, they've established ties, but they have gone on the wrong side of the law, but they have a kid here. Like, it's very hard to see from a humanitarian point of view what somebody like that going to do. Like, uproot your kid and go to a country that the kid's never been born. That's pretty tough. There's also people who are here who were brought to the US as children of undocumented immigrants. So literally, this is the only country they've ever known, but they were born here. They were born somewhere else, and then they've lived here since they were 2. So there's just a lot of people who are on the wrong side of immigration law, and illegal seems to imply levels of criminality and bad behavior that don't really seem to fit the complexity of the situation. I think Andrea is also going to talk about a more legalistic perspective on this, but a lot of people who study this stuff, this is kind of how we think about it. So then this is what we have, and then we also have another round of anti-immigrant politics. In particular, President Trump ran for office in 2016. One of the big things that he wanted to do to distinguish himself from other Republicans at the time was really be like the anti-immigrant candidate. And he said things about immigrants involving a lot of claims of criminality. And this is basically untrue. Obviously, there are some criminals anywhere, everywhere. But immigrants, there's research on this. These are complicated topics, but there's a lot of research, and the research is really quite consistent. Immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, unauthorized immigrants, commit crimes at somewhat lower rates than natives. Right? I could talk a little bit about the evidence on that if you want, but it's just not true that this immigration is this issue of kind of mass criminality and thieving and drug dealing and whatever. It's just not really true. But again, what we have is a president who ran on a platform of deporting people, right? That one of the slogans, and they printed a bunch of handouts at the nominating convention in 2024, was mass deportations now. That's what he promised. And to do that, the Republican Party in Congress also passed massive increases in the budget of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as CBP, Customs and Border Patrol. Their budgets have grown like 10 times, and they now have bigger budgets than all of the other domestic security agencies put together. And they're being told by the executive branch, you have to be deporting thousands of people a day. And so they're going out and trying to do that. They've also been told that the people they're meant to be deporting are criminals, so they're in some cases going out as if they're, armed and ready to catch criminals. And that's just not, there just aren't really those people out there. The US already has long had a policy that if you get convicted of a crime as an immigrant, you serve your time in the US, and then you get deported. Right? And those people, it's pretty hard to not get deported at the end of your criminal sentence, right? Like, they know where you are. So that is something that the US has been doing for a long time, and there's just not a ton of those, and so the president can't meet his campaign promise by doing that, and that, I think, is why they're resorting to things that are getting a lot more opposition. Right? We have this combination of immigrants are, for the most part, community members, and the enforcement actions are resorting to things that look just really extreme compared to what you would need for community members. So I guess that is my probably not quick enough, okay, not too bad, trying to understand, like, how did we get here now? What's going on? I'm also not very optimistic about the prospect of reform, but I'll save you that if you want. And that's why I think we are where we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very nicely done. And quickly. I learned a ton. So thank you very much, Alex. I want to welcome all of you as well. And I want to thank you. Alex, you were the one organizing this. Back in September, you approached me, and I want to thank you for asking me to be a panelist. It's a good opportunity, I think, for all of us to have a nice, civil, hopefully conversation, time to learn more about this issue. It's a complex issue. If there were simple answers to it, it would have been solved, right? So it's not simple, it's complex. And we want to work to see differing perspectives, but also while remaining, as a bishop, and as the bishops of our country and our Holy Father, remaining committed to the consistent teachings of our church, which are based in Scripture. If you'll bear with me. a few scripture passages. If you want to make God mad in the Old Testament, if you want to make him mad in the Old Testament, who do you mess with? Widows, orphans, and aliens. That's who he defends over and over and over. So listen, Exodus. You shall not oppress a resident alien. You well know how it feels to be an alien, since you were once aliens yourselves in the land of Egypt. Deuteronomy. For the Lord your God is a God of gods, the Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who has no favorites, accepts no bribes, who executes justice for the orphan and the widow, and loves the resident alien, giving them food and clothing. So you too should love the resident alien, for that is what you were in the land of Egypt. Another one from Deuteronomy 27. Cursed be anyone who deprives the resident alien, the orphan, or the widow of justice. And all the people shall answer, Amen. Jeremiah. If you no longer oppress the alien, the orphan, and the widow, if you no longer shed innocent blood in this place, or follow after other gods to your own harm, only then will I let you continue to dwell in this place, the land I gave your ancestors long ago and forever. Psalm 146, the Lord protects the resident alien, comes to the aid of the orphan and the widow, but thwarts the way of the wicked. You get the picture. I could go on and on and on. The New Testament. Remember, Jesus was a migrant. Now, a different definition than we use now. But if Egypt wouldn't have let him in, he'd have been slaughtered with the innocents when all of them were killed under the age of 2. And then he came back. Right? Didn't know the language either. The Old Testament sense of protection for migrants continues in the New. Matthew chapter 25, for I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. A stranger, and you welcomed me. Hebrews, do not neglect hospitality, for through it some have unknowingly entertained angels. And Christians associated themselves with aliens as sojourners of this world with a citizenship in heaven. Paul to the Ephesians, so then you are no longer strangers and sojourners, but you are all fellow citizens with the holy ones and members of the household of God. So we have enough scriptural evidence, and the constant teaching, the tradition of the church, which we now have a much more robust Catholic social teaching, which as its foundation, its most principled one, is the life and dignity of every human person. And then the other 6 that flow from it: call to family, community, and participation, human rights and responsibilities, option for the poor and the vulnerable, dignity of work and rights of workers, solidarity, walking with each other, and care for God's creation. So we have solid ground. And some ask, it's quite remarkable. We bishops had a rare moment a few months ago in November when we had a special message that we put out, which we hardly ever do. And even more shockingly, it got 96% approval rate among all the bishops. That never, ever happens. Never. And there was a long-standing applause after we were able to vote and put out our statement. Is the statement perfect? No. It's never a perfect statement when it's only 1 page long about all sorts of difficult issues, right? But it is important that we had 2 tenets that we were trying to hold. To recognize that nations have a responsibility to regulate their borders and establish a just and orderly immigration system for the sake of the common good. But also Catholic teaching exhorts nations to recognize fundamental dignities of immigrants. And so we promised our immigrant brothers and sisters that we will stand with them in their suffering and that they're not alone. And pointing out as well the tensions that have increased for law enforcement. Right? I was with someone, he'll remain nameless, but he was picked up for speeding. I was on the other side sitting with him. But watching the police officer approach the car, it really struck me how afraid and nervous he looked. You just don't know what you're walking up to, right? And so there's real tension, and we have to acknowledge that. But we've tried to hold that tension as well. that Archbishop Hebda from Minneapolis had some great statements. He said, "It will take hard work. There's human costs on all sides. We must restore moral order, not to erase borders or demonize newcomers, and we must act now." He also said, "We cannot blame all immigrants for the crimes of some, just as we cannot blame all law enforcement for the abuse of some. We have to keep in mind that most immigrants, my dear people, come to seek a better life. They really don't want to leave their home. They're coming to seek a better life, and most are not violent criminals." And grouping them all together, violent and non-violent, I think does harm. Words matter. Words do matter. And so using the right word to describe situations can get the level of the temperature to go down. But it is, we got to remember too, so many of our own families were immigrants to this country, right? Look at our own ancestors. And many of them are fleeing Christian persecution, right? Anti-Catholicism, martyrdom. Now we might all think, they should be martyred. Easier said than done, right? Easier said than done. So it's not being able to distinguish, and I hope we'll get a little distinction here from a legal side, but illegal and criminal versus undocumented and irregular, and not using labels. Not using labels. I remember, and then I'll sit down and wait and answer some questions at the end. I remember Pope Leo was meeting with a bunch of high school kids, and I was at that meeting. It was virtual in Indianapolis, and one of the kids asked about, politics and religion, and the Holy Father said, "Kids, I beg you, do not define your faith with labels. Don't define your faith with labels." Right? How many times people have asked me, is the Pope conservative? Is the Pope liberal? Those terms, the Catholic Church's teachings are more conservative than conservatives and more liberal than liberals. It's huge. And I thought that was such good advice from our Holy Father to young people. Don't get stuck with labels. Don't do that to your faith. Right? Don't do that to your faith. And I think we're seeing those labels, it's getting harder and harder, that we're becoming more monolithic, each political party. And there's not even any differences within it. Where it used to be, when I was a kid, there was much more, if you will, diversity of thought. In both party or no party, right? But now it's like, the platform's it. And that's it. And there's no discussion with it once it's passed. So we have work to do, right? But the Catholic Church will not stop talking about this issue. I just want you to know that, and some of you may not like to hear that, and some of you do. But it's not based on political reasons, and it's not based on because our migrants are coming from Catholic countries and we want the Catholics to come so our mass attendance goes up and we can get more money. No, that argument is actually made. That's why they think we're saying this. That's not what we're doing. These are our brothers and sisters. These are human beings with inherent dignity given to them by God. What will you do with them when they're here and they're not supposed to be here? We work that out. But once they're knocking on my door, I open the door and I give them food and clothing and the necessary health care they're going to need. Legislators, they have to figure out what they're going to do to solve it. But once they're knocking on the door, they're going to be fed by us, right? We don't ask them, are you here illegally? We ask them, when was the last time you ate? And we figure out those other things down the road. But that's the work of legislature. One last thing, Pope Francis was asked about all these problems, right when he was elected Pope. And he said, my job, my vocation, the reason I'm the vicar of Christ on earth isn't to have all the answers to all the world's problems. He said, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world. That's what I'm here for. The problems have to be solved by all of us, working together, right? So that's the key, huh? Working together. Thank you.
Thank you to the Bishop and Professor Street. So I'll start by showing this child's toy and share a story about one of my first classes in law school that's focused on immigration law. The professor brought in this toy, and his point was simple. Immigration law is about finding the right shape to fit someone into. There's various pathways and nuances to immigration law, and his point was trying to find somebody on the right path or the right shape within our legal system. And while I appreciate the nuance of that example, in practice I've learned something different. For many people, both inside and out of the U.S., their shape simply doesn't fit within the confines of our immigration laws. As an immigration attorney, I regularly meet individuals who have lived in the U.S. for years, have no criminal record, pay taxes, attend church, raise U.S. citizen children, and are deeply rooted in their communities. And yet, there's no lawful pathway for them to obtain or correct their legal status. Our immigration system is complex and constantly shifting with each new administration. Today, I want to walk you through a snapshot, so briefly, of the lawful pathways into the U.S., and then talk about some of the dramatic enforcement changes we're currently seeing. Before we talk about enforcement or detention, we have to understand something foundational. How do people legally come to the U.S. in the first place? Legal pathways often fall into two categories. We have non-immigrant pathways and immigrant or permanent pathways. That's your green card pathways. In the non-immigrant category, we call this the alphabet soup of categories, mostly because these visas are aligned with letters through the alphabet. We have tourism, B1, B2s, students, F1s, religious workers, R1s, temporary workers, H1Bs. They work in specialty occupations and require either a bachelor's or master's degree. We have agricultural workers on the H2A programs. We have athletes, artists, entertainers. So there's a plethora of non-immigrant categories. The main point being that they are here for a specific purpose, for a specific duration. Sometimes people can apply to enter the U.S. with these visas on their own, and sometimes they have to be sponsored by employers. As Alex was saying, then we also have those immigrant or permanent pathways. And as he said, we have them, they've been the same categories for many years, which include employment-based pathways. Now, employment-based pathways take many, many years and are very expensive. They fall into different categories where an employer or a business needs to sponsor an individual to work in a specific field with a specific pay. It involves testing the U.S. labor market to ensure that there's no qualified U.S. workers, and only then does somebody achieve or eventually become a permanent resident through this specific employment path. For family-based pathways, there's people who are put into different categories based on the family member who's sponsoring them. Many categories are subject to annual limits or numerical caps. Once those caps are reached, they created backlogs that stretch many, many years, some decades. So it can be 10 to 20 years before somebody's green card is available for them to finally process and enter the U.S. We have humanitarian pathways, which are extremely limited. So as Alex had mentioned, there's people who enter as refugees. Those numbers have gone severely down in the last few years. We have people who try to apply for asylum inside the U.S. There's also certain pathways for people who have been victims of crimes in the U.S. and people who have been victims of human trafficking. There are certain pathways for minor children to be designated as a special immigrant if they've been abused, abandoned, or neglected. The most recent category is President Trump's gold card. This is a new category that was created about a year ago. And for the small price of $1 million donation to the U.S. Treasury and a $15,000 application fee, you can be expeditiously granted your green card. Companies can also sponsor an individual to receive their gold card for a donation to the U.S. Treasury of $2 million plus that $15,000 application fee. As Alex also said, the diversity lottery or the green card lottery did function to provide a pathway for individuals who had historically low immigration rates to the U.S. As of 2026, that program has been paused. So these are the legal doors, but what happens when none of these doors are available? That brings us to another reality, which is entering without inspection. So what does entering without inspection look like? Often it means months of travel through multiple countries. Oftentimes it means presenting yourself at a border or trying to cross between them. Oftentimes people try to present themselves to Customs and Border Protection, at which point they will be taken into custody. They will complete biometrics, have multiple interviews, medical exams, and then finally released, or some may be released, I should say. After somebody is apprehended, then typically it starts a process where if they are released from detention, they are provided with something called a notice to appear, and that initiates their removal proceedings. They will be given a court date, and then through that court date, they will have the opportunity to present any kind of claim for relief or show the judge that they have a pathway to remain lawfully. Also, if somebody is detained, they could also be expeditiously removed. Essentially what expeditious removal means is that somebody is very quickly removed from the U.S. without having the opportunity to speak with an immigration judge. People can remain detained. So if somebody remains detained, they can be in prolonged detention with the opportunity to present their case with an immigration judge, but in a detained setting. There's been significant encounters over the past few years. In 2023, we saw the highest rates of border encounters with over 2 million people being encountered or trying to present themselves at the U.S. border. Under the Biden administration, they tried to curb that by creating a process where people can apply to enter the U.S. at the southern border through an app called CBP One. If somebody entered with the app, they would create or schedule an appointment, and then once the appointment was completed, then they would be paroled into the U.S. and then allowed to pursue their case through the immigration court system. Now, the immigration court system has been in a period of backlog for a number of years. There's currently over 3 million cases backlogged with the immigration court. 2 million of those cases are people who are seeking asylum or protection in the U.S. Recently, there's been severe numbers of immigration judges who have either been retired or let go. Nearly 100 immigration judges have been fired in the last year. In Montana, when people are put into removal or deportation proceedings, they process out of a court in Portland, Oregon, because there's no immigration court here in Montana. At the start of 2025, there were 5 immigration judges, and now we're down to 1 immigration judge at the Portland Immigration Court. So even though people are getting detained every day, cases just aren't moving forward. When we talk about people who enter this way, we often hear one word, and of course that's the word we've all been touching on, was criminal or illegal. But legally speaking, that word just isn't accurate. Immigration law was created as a system of civil administrative law, not a criminal one. The end result, if somebody's case is ultimately denied at the immigration court, of course there's appeal procedures that someone can pursue, but the end result is ultimately removal or deportation. This is not supposed to be seen as a form of punishment. Most immigration violations, when somebody is put into removal proceedings, is a result of an administrative violation. So maybe somebody took an action that wasn't compatible with their visa. For example, a student working without proper authorization, or somebody overstayed the period of admission that they were allowed to be in the U.S. It's important to know that statuses can be fluid, which often make people vulnerable to immigration enforcement. If somebody's in the U.S. in one status, they can apply to change their status to another. During that process, it takes many, many months for immigration to review your application and approve that application. During that period, it's considered a period of authorized stay, but now somebody in that period of authorized stay is subject to being detained under new enforcement policies. Calling a person illegal conflates civil infractions with crimes. It dehumans individuals, it distorts the public perception, and it influences policy through stigma. As others have said, the better terms are undocumented, unauthorized, or I personally like the term pre-legal. But if immigration is civil, not criminal, that raises the important question, why does it so often look and feel like a criminal system? The key distinctions between the civil immigration violation and the criminal system importantly involve the right to an attorney. Under a criminal court process, somebody who is accused of a crime is afforded an attorney whether or not they can provide one. In immigration court system, although people have the right to have an attorney, it's at no cost to the government, which means individuals are responsible for finding their own legal representation, or it's up to their families, communities, friends, to find some reliable legal help. This often means that people face the immigration court system alone, and this includes children who have appeared before judges on their own. It's important to remember that an unlawful entry can be a crime, although this is a misdemeanor crime. The offense of improper entry carries a fine of $50 or a minimum fine of $50, at the most $350. That differs from illegal re-entry. Illegal re-entry is a felony offense, and that applies to people who enter improperly after they've already received a removal or deportation order. It's also really important to know that requesting asylum, appearing at the border, and requesting protection from the U.S. is a recognized process and not a crime. So if immigration is technically civil, then why are tens of thousands of people being held in detention? Immigration detention is legally administrative, and it's supposed to be housed as not a criminal punishment, although it sure looks like one. Recent numbers show that about 70,000 to 75,000 people are currently detained. This is a record high. About 75% of those people have no serious criminal record other than an immigration infraction. It's also important to know that the places where people are housed or detained, these are private for-profit prisons, and they often resemble jails. There's nothing administrative about being detained in immigration processing. Even as detention number rises and enforcement expands, I come back to that child's toy from my first day at law school. The question isn't whether someone fits into the shape our law currently provides. The deeper question is, what kind of shapes do we want our laws to create? Immigration law is not static. It changes dramatically throughout American history, expanding during some eras and retracting during others. Every generation plays a role in shaping what fairness looks like. The increase in detention numbers is tells us something important. Not necessarily that people are more dangerous, but that policy choices are shifting, and policy choices can shift again. At its core, immigration law is about human beings, families, workers, students, and children, navigating systems far more complex than the shape that that child's toy ever suggested. My hope is that conversations like this, grounded in fact, legal clarity, and human dignity, help us think critically, compassionately, and constructively about where to go from here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dagim Degaro. I am a proud Carroll alum of class of 2024. I work at the Office of Institutional Advancement, and I'm the Alumni and Community Engagement Coordinator. All of them before me said a lot of great stuff, and I just want to share my personal story since I've been navigating the U.S. immigration system, and there are a lot of misconceptions and a lot of not factual stuff going on. So I just want to clear up some stuff. And before that, I'll just share a quick story about myself. I came from Ethiopia. I was born and raised there. I was born in a place called Jimma. It's the birthplace of coffee, so we can all relate to that. Yeah, I grew up there, beautiful neighborhood. We didn't have much, but at the same time, we made the best out of what we had. Because as a community, we were really strong and we were tight, we were really tight. So I grew up in that kind of neighborhood. Then, long story short, as many of you here know that 4 or 5 years ago, there was a civil war going on in Ethiopia, and it hasn't been talked much as it should, because millions of people died in just 2 years or a year. It was really heartbreaking to see, and a lot of people fled the country because of that, and I'm one of them. Living home is not easy, no matter what you have, no matter what you do. It doesn't matter if your parents are rich or poor, or you grew up in a rich neighborhood or poor neighborhood. Living home is really hard because all you know and all you have is there, including family members and loved ones. So I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to come to the United States on a student visa to the University of Montana in Missoula. That place was Missoula in general. I really loved a lot. I really love Missoula. There are a lot of cool people that I met and still talk to. And when I go to that school, I took out student loan. The reason I say that is a lot of people ask me, or personally as well, and I've heard I just came here, went to school for free. I did not. When I was in Missoula, I took out student loan. Most of the students can relate with me as well. So then that's when I transferred to Carroll to play soccer, because I got the opportunity to play soccer and got a little bit of scholarship. And when I came to Carroll, I was lucky enough to meet a donor here who was also a Carroll alum, Bray Kunst, and he helped me to go to school here, and I didn't pay anything. I was lucky enough. So it's not the government. I didn't take any money from the government, but there was individuals that helped me here. So then once I came here, I had to file asylum because there was a daily civil war going home. I can't go back, and to file an asylum, asylum's supposed to be free. You can do it, but it's so risky to file it for yourself as paperwork. All you have to file, it's a lot of paperwork. she can talk about that, and it's a lot of pages, a lot of stories. The stories that you have to it has to be in order, and you can't mess up. If you mess up, you're more likely to be rejected. So again, I had the resources to go to have a lawyer and file for asylum. But to file for an asylum, as of right now, so far, to my knowledge, it costs, to pay the lawyer fee. Asylum is free, but to have a lawyer, it costs anywhere from $6,000 to $9,000, and depending on what kind of lawyer you get. But still, that's a lot of money, especially for people who just came to the country, because you have to file asylum technically within 1 year, and it's so hard because you can't even work without filing an asylum. So you're pretty much tied. So if you want your work permit, you have to file for asylum. And that's when I did, and I filed for asylum, and I got my work permit, and I graduated school. I pretty much work all over in Helena. I work at Shodair, I worked at Flores Creighton. I volunteered in a lot of places because I had my work permit, and I I got my driver's license, I passed the test. It just didn't get like easily. I had to pass, it's English as well, and I passed the test. Then, you know, I graduated college and I was lucky enough to get a job here at Carroll at the alumni office. Everything was great. The community, like the help that I got from Carroll community members and faculty, staff when I was a student, and a lot of community members helped me to be where I'm at right now. Then my work permit expired after 2 years, right? Because you only get 2 years. Then they changed it to 5 after me, and now they're back to 1, I guess. So it expired, and at that time, I was married to my wife, Megan. She also works at Carroll, and she's a Carroll alum. And we were on adjustment of status. And when we do that, there was a gap between my green card interview and my work permit expiration date. So it was like almost 4 up to 5 months that I technically became like undocumented, because I tried to get my driver license. They can't, they're really nice people, the people who work there, but they can't do anything. They've never had this kind of experience. So I didn't drive for 6 months almost. And that's the community, like the people that I helped, like my wife is driving me around, my staff, like my coworkers, friends, family, like people are just giving me a ride everywhere. And I'm really thankful for that as well. Then finally, I was lucky enough and got my green card, which is my permanent resident card, and that will allow me to file for citizenship in like 2-3 years. But I was really lucky, because there are a lot of people in this country that I personally know that been here legally through like student visa or came here file status, been here for a long time, like 10, 12 years, and still don't have like any kind of status. So they're still on pending situation, and I was really lucky enough to have that. So there's a lot of misconceptions about this, like the immigrants in general, because I've been paying taxes even when I was a student, and which I'm really glad to do, and I pay taxes now as a worker, and I have not received any money from the government. Like, because I'm saying this because there is a lot of people who just see me and think, oh, I'm on free healthcare, and I'm on like, you know, I don't pay taxes and all that. I mean, if that was true, I'll tell you, oh yeah, I haven't. I'll take that. But unfortunately, no. And if you want to see how much I pay, HR is right down there. So you can go there. But yeah, I've been, this is my journey so far. But I just want to say, like, we all humans at the end of the day, right? Like, we all been created in the image of God. And we all just gotta respect each other, love each other. Like, Helena gave me a lot in general, right? Like, I didn't know anyone in Helena when I came here. No one. It was 4 years ago when I transferred here. I didn't know anyone. It was like very strange. Like, cause when I was back home, I knew a lot of people, like community, like everyone. But when I came here, it was weird. It was hard. But now I know a lot of people. I have families. I have friends. People that are always willing to help me when I need something. And I try to give back to the community. Till my driver license expired, like I was trying to help people, like the kids, to coach some soccer, free, and I was trying to help with big brother, big sisters. That's a big, like I was trying to give back to the community, and I think we all should do the same as well. But just in general, this has been my journey, and just want to clarify that we just gotta love each other and respect and treat each other like a human. Thank you.
not confidence. If it's okay, I'm going to put the screen back just so it doesn't distract me. The best part about being a moderator is I get to ask the questions, but also all of the panelists stayed within the time frame. Let's give them a hand. I didn't have to cut off one question, which is wonderful. So these are some questions that we received from a variety of students from a variety of classes in different disciplines. Specifically, we had some questions from a sociology class, some questions from a theology class on Catholic social teaching, and we also had some questions from an intro class from our core students in first year writing class. So we're going to start actually with Ms. Sweeney. I'm going to be very formal here tonight. So. But Ms. Sweeney, we've got some. Can you turn that one off? Maybe that'll help. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Thanks. That would drive me crazy. Okay. Ms. Sweeney, could you, I know this might be a difficult question, but could you walk us through what a typical immigration case might look like from start to finish as briefly as you can, because we only have a few more minutes to go, but could you just give us some sense of what that looks like?
I mean, every case is so different. So the one thing I say they all have in common would be a consultation with me to start. But really, it's going to depend on the different paths that people are going on, right? So we talked about employment, we talked about family pathways, we talked about humanitarian. And so while, if we can fit somebody under those categories, they might look similarly, they're all going to have different nuances and things with them. But usually, if we are able to find a path for somebody, it's going to involve doing some research, right? So we're trying to figure out getting people's documents translated, getting all the supporting evidence that we need to show that they qualify for the status that we're going to be applying for. It involves preparing a lot of forms. So I think Dagim can speak to all of the forms that are involved with a green card process alone. So there's a lot of forms and documentation that need to be filled out. Then typically, I guess the typical is you submit it to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. Once your case is submitted, you're going to get some receipts back, and that's when you're going to start tracking and seeing how long your specific case is going to take. Typically, after people have their cases filed, they're going to be scheduled to go to a biometric appointment. A biometric appointment is where they take your fingerprints, they take your pictures, so that the government can run the necessary background checks. Then you're going to be in a period of waiting. So for some people, if they qualify, along with their application for benefits, they can apply for work authorization. For some people, they can apply for a travel permit. So many people, when they're applying to change their status or adjust their status or in different kind of limbos, it's important to know that they can't leave the U.S. If they leave, they are abandoning their application. And so unless you get your case approved or you get a special travel permit that costs an additional $630, then you can leave and travel and come back, even though now it's still pretty risky. So you're then just kind of waiting for your case to process, and along the way you're getting some additional benefits, and then eventually you're going to be scheduled for an interview. The interview is going to take place at your local USCIS office. For us in Montana, the field office is here in Helena, but that means people from all over the state are going to have to travel here to come to their interview. The officers at USCIS are lovely. They're going to review your application and then hopefully make a decision. So that is kind of the typical process. Where things go wrong is if your case is then denied, and then there's a lot of different hoops and things that you need to jump through. But I'd say that's kind of the pathway for many.
It's very impressive how you did that so quickly. Thank you. Mr. Degaro, did that resonate? And were there any unexpected bumps in the road or, yeah, things that you weren't expecting that caught you by surprise during your process?
Yeah, I mean, since I filed for two things. I mean, when you file for asylum, like you have to file for work permit in there as well. And when you file for a green card, you can file for that travel that she mentioned, like the travel, all that. But it's the time is like the one that really is the hardest part, because I filed for asylum in 2023 or 2022, and I'm still like it's still pending, because like I didn't hear anything about the asylum part. But I have my green card, and I like I said earlier, like I know a lot of people that filed the asylum and still waiting on the like to hear something. And looking now with the whole situation going on, they might not probably hear anything anytime soon, because there's a lot of backlog going on, and it's the interest from the government side as well is not that much. So there's a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, because like there's also like it's hard. It's really hard, and the time part is the one that really and not knowing the decision as well. Like it's really it worried me, and I have a lot of friends who are going the same path that I went through, and they don't know what they're gonna do as well. And I just had a friend who had to leave the country because his TPS status got ended. Like TPS with temporary protection, so it's temporary, but like they usually extend it when they see when they feel like the country is still not in good condition. But they just terminated the TPS, and a friend of mine has actually had to leave the country because of that.
Thank you.
Oh, I just wanted to add real quick.
Yes.
Currently, so a process that Dagim was going through, we call that affirmative asylum, right? Meaning he entered the U.S. legally, he applied affirmatively for his asylum application. Currently, all affirmative asylum applications are on pause, so our government's not reviewing them or adjudicating them. And what's happening is they're going back and re-reviewing anybody who was approved during the Biden administration. So even people who may have been granted asylum are still vulnerable because now their cases are kind of being re-adjudicated.
Thank you. Bishop Vetter, I wondered if you could help us think about this, and other panelists jump in too as well, but how can Catholic social teaching provide a framework to help citizens and lawmakers balance a nation's right to secure borders with our moral obligation to, as you so rightly pointed out, to welcome the stranger?
I mean, like I said, it's not easy. So we have to keep teaching and preaching the principles, right, which we stand on, that civil society needs, right, the dignity and worth of each human person, and then going from there. I had told someone who was upset with me, I said, well, if someone's on death row or a prisoner who committed an awful crime, and I visit the prison. One gentleman's in there has 150 years. He got 3 life sentences, so 150 years. Should I visit him? Should anyone visit him? Should we feed him? I mean, he did awful things. How about the one on death row? And we have some here in Montana that are on death row that are still not resolved. Would you be scandalized if you heard that I visited them in prison as your bishop? Or would you hope I would do that? And I would hope you would do the same. I don't do it because I'm a bishop. I do it because I'm a human being. Right? And that should be all of our attitudes of saying, let's try to resolve it, let's see what we can do. But name calling or, kind of not holding up their dignity and worth. It's just, we have to. And just as I said before, it's not just on this. Some would agree with me on this, but they don't agree with me on the death penalty. Maybe they agree with me on abortion, but not on this thing. And I'm not. We are going to stand on those principles, and we're going to say it in season and out of season, if they're popular or not. Right? So, and it's across the board. It's not just the United States. We're involved in these things all over. I can tell you this one story. I served Mass, midnight Mass, at St. Peter's Basilica as a seminarian my first year when I studied in Rome. And I was one of the 4 main servers. So whenever the Pope did his prayers, I held the book. There's another story for another time. And I'm in the little room, vesting room, right where the Pietà is, if you've been to Rome. And the Secretary of State came in as he was getting vested for Mass. And he told him, the Holy Father, that Manuel Noriega, the dictator from Nicaragua, there was a coup and they wanted to kill him. And he was asking for sanctuary at the Vatican Embassy. And so the Secretary of State asked the Pope right before midnight Mass, and he looked at us, and he spoke in English, and he said, yes, let him in the embassy. And that's one of the main reasons why these places are called sanctuary cities, or sanctuaries. So the Vatican gave Manuel Noriega, and guess what? They were not happy with him, right? Because he saw his dignity and worth still. And so gave him sanctuary at the Vatican so he wouldn't be killed. And then he had to leave. But that's part of the reason. So when people say, when they come to the church, what do? Well, we don't do background checks. We don't do criminal checks, right? When we see the person, right? So some people are very upset that we wouldn't call, right? And turn them in. And each case, like you said, is different. We don't harbor, violent criminals. They're not staying in the basement of the cathedral, okay? We call the police and say, I think we got your killer. And then I'll go visit the killer in prison, right? And I'll see him there. But I think, when you remove it and make them so much different than we are, it's very easy to treat them poorly. But you go to visit those prisons and you hear their stories. We're doing something right now with Carol, working on trying to have an event this summer for those who are in prison, their children, to have a little weekend with them and to help the children of those whose moms are in Boulder, right? Is that okay for us to do that? Right? So you can pick any issue. It just, so we can't just pick and choose, right? The dignity and worth is universal. So
that was helpful to raise this question of sanctuary. That's come up a lot lately, and some of our student questions were around that. And I want to read this question in full. It's a very thoughtful question from a student, and they wrote this. In their 2003 pastoral letter, Strangers No Longer, the bishops of the U.S. and Mexico write that immigration enforcement, quote, should be left to federal authorities and not transferred to local police who necessarily have other priorities and who are untrained in the proper methods for enforcing immigration law. That was back in 2003. And of course, this continues to be one of the points of tension on the question of immigration. We've seen in the news recently how some local law enforcement organizations are partnering with ICE through what is called the 287G program, or else refusing to cooperate with ICE as, quote, sanctuary cities. And I wondered, maybe Ms. Sweeney and Dr. Street, if you could help us kind of learn more about this. Can you explain for our audience what is 287G program? What is that? What is a sanctuary city? We've heard it from the religious side, but what does it mean legally? And what might be some of the benefits or dangers of partnerships between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities? Either of you want to take that on first? Or take all of those questions?
So 287G is a statute in the Immigration and Nationality Act. And essentially it allows states, counties, cities to partner with ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and receive some training and receive some access to some federal databases, and so that they can essentially function as a federal officer and hold people if they believe them to be removable or deportable. Here in Montana, there's, I believe, 4 287G agreements in place. There's a statewide one that pertains to our state highway patrol, so that covers every corner of our state. Flathead County has a 287G agreement. Gallatin County has a 287G agreement, and Garfield County has a 287G agreement. The way we see it play out is essentially during a traffic stop. Let's say somebody does not present a valid license, or maybe they speak with an accent, and an officer can then use their information to request an ICE hold, and then that individual will be held in detention until they're picked up by federal authorities. So that's really how that
Okay, hi. I'll say just a couple of things. One reason why some local police departments don't want to do that, and it's you'll see these kind of statements from sheriffs or police chiefs or whatever in different parts of the country, is if there's a big immigrant community within, typically it's a city, the local police do not want to get into a situation where people won't call. They want people to call if people are the victims of crime or if they're a witness to a crime. And they worry that if it gets to the point where people expect that any time you call the police, you're also calling in a bunch of immigration enforcement, that's going to undermine trust, and that those will be areas that risk becoming lawless because people are not calling the cops. And so that is the logic. There are also some people who, maybe Andrea knows a bit more about this, but my understanding is ICE can flag you as undocumented or potentially undocumented without necessarily going through much of a process of proving that. And so then what you can have, you can have local police holding somebody in a way that would not normally, like we wouldn't normally hold people on that kind of evidentiary basis. Normally we would want to see a judicial warrant where a judge has said, oh, there's enough evidence here, or I think also if an officer has probable cause. Those are the two grounds on which you can hold people. And ICE doesn't necessarily, their process for immigration detainers doesn't necessarily have that stuff. And so some local police don't want to be in the business of holding people when they don't really know what the evidence is for it.
I guess I can also touch on sanctuary cities. So, many cities across the U.S. have declared themselves to be sanctuary cities. And essentially what that means in practice is that they're not interested in helping federal agencies complete these immigration enforcement actions. It does not mean that they're going to interfere with federal immigration enforcement actions, that they're going to wall up their city, but it just means that they're not going to give up their time and resources to help federal agents hold somebody on what might not be accurate or truthful evidence. And so sanctuary cities kind of present themselves as such, and that they're not going to maybe take that extra mile to sign a 287G agreement. We're also seeing that cities and states, mostly states, can offer driver's license and then be declared a sanctuary city, and just by giving someone a driver's license, whether or not they have any kind of legal status. Certainly that's a public safety issue where we want people who are driving on the roads to be licensed and to pass a test and to know the rules of the road, and that by granting them these licensures, they are deemed a sanctuary city, and certainly are facing a lot of federal backlash against getting some federal funding if they're having these policies in place. Here in Montana, I think Helena just passed a lovely resolution in their city council that just specifically said they're not going to join a 287G agreement, or they have no interest in doing that. And now I believe they're being investigated because Montana has a law that says that no city, county, or municipality can issue any kind of sanctuary policies. And so, I think these policies really are just about helping people navigate day-to-day life, driving their cars, maybe having some extra medical benefits or health benefits, but yeah, right now we don't allow sanctuary policy in Montana.
Thank you. I want to be mindful of time. We still have some excellent questions from students, but I did want to give an opportunity for one or two questions from our audience this evening, and then maybe we could get one or two and then return to student questions if we have time or not. And we're going to ask Jay Nelson to come up. He's going to be our mic person for us. Thank you. We've got mics all over the place here.
Hi, thank you. This question is for you, Bishop Leonard. When we get into the deal, first off, I want to thank everybody for this. This is a great forum because this is a very touchy subject for a lot of people, and people seem to polarize when they go on these things. So it's good to get information out here. When we're going to our Catholic teachings on it all, on the Catechism 2241 says, more prosperous nations are obliged to the extent they are able to welcome the foreigner in search of the security and the means of livelihood which they cannot find in his or her country. So when we see that, isn't that what legal immigration is all about?
Yeah, I think it is very important that we keep making those distinctions and, everyone remaining calm and saying, yes, that would be ideal, right? That absolutely there should be a legal way that's not overly burdensome, that's not so restrictive if we are prosperous, and, so that we are letting in more than 50 people, right, if we can handle it. Having criteria, all those things, those are all legitimate. So we're not against that. And we wouldn't advocate that we shouldn't be a nation of laws and rules, and that when they have them and they debated them and they set up lawful, right, just laws, that even if I don't like them, I should follow them, unless they're immoral, right? But just because I don't get my way doesn't justify me just doing what I want without dealing with the consequences, okay? So we have a process for all these things to change laws and those sorts of things. But as far as should our country, I think we would say it is more prosperous than most, then we should be trying to have generous legal ways for people to come. And then we can set up saying we're not going to allow you to be a citizen for 10 years, or your green card's going to expire after 5. But if you say your green card's going to expire after 5 years, and they don't let you know their answer until 8 years, what do you do with the 3 years that they didn't give you any information on? We had a priest who missed a date. He's from Poland. He works up in Kalispell. He missed a date for his green card or whatever it was for his interview by a day. It just got away, you know how those things go, and it wasn't on his mind. It threw him into a whole tizzy. He hadn't been home to see his parents. He couldn't leave the country for 12 years. He finally got to go home and see him. And it was because even the cards that they were doing, it's so backlogged, it's taking so long that they're delayed years past when they expire. Well, what is a person supposed to do? Go back to Ethiopia and enter into a civil war? Or, so like I said, there's no easy answers. But the church isn't just saying, open them up completely. No, you have a right to protect, your country needs that, right? But for prosperous nations, we should have a legal process in which those poorer nations who want to have a better life, like my great-great-grandparents came over from what's now the Ukraine, right? And they fled because of religious persecution. So I'm glad they did. But if they kick me out now because they decide we don't want Ukrainians here anymore, or German Russians, could they still do that? Could they do it 58 years after the fact?
Excuse me, how do they do that 58 years after the fact?
Could they?
No, they don't.
No, but could they? That's what
No,
I'm
they
saying.
can't. Because there's immigration law to follow.
Right, but what if
Correct.
you change the immigration law, just as they were saying? What if you change the laws, right? That's why we have to be a part of these conversations. Immigration laws has changed dramatically, as you've so bothly pointed out, right? So we don't want to create fear, right? But we also want to be clear that to be generous to those who are in hardship and in need is our Christian and human responsibility.
Correctly, it is. And then in 2242 of the Catechism, it says that, that citizens are obliged, a citizen is obliged in conscience not to follow the direction of civil authorities when they're in contrary to the demands of the moral order, the fundamental rights of persons and teachings of the gospel. Refusing obedience to civil authorities when their demands are contrary to those of an upright conscience finds its justification in the distinction between serving God and serving the political community. When citizens are under the oppression of public authority, which oversteps its competence, they should still not refuse to give or do what is objectively demanded of them by the common good.
That's right. So civil disobedience, right, or conscientious objectors, the church teaches that, yes, there are times that that's appropriate. Not all the time, right? It's got to be for, like it says, it goes against the moral order, it's not for the common good, all those things. It's not, so it would say, for example, if it's a just war and I'm getting drafted in World War II, I can be, I can be a conscientious objector, but not everyone can be. Because someone's got to go and stop the evil that's happening. Okay? And the church understands that and actually says, that's good. Right? That would be a good to stop evil that's happening on a world scale. Right? But war is never good. But having a sense of patriotism and a sense of your own love of country is a virtue. Okay? Love of country is a virtue. We should love our country. And many of the people who do come here love their country. Right? Most do. I can't speak for all of them, but they do, just like Dagim. So, what you want to do with any of these moral art issues, you set your principles that's going to meet the vast majority of situations. And then you deal with the outliers. Not base the law on the outliers and then blanket everyone in it. Do what is for the most and then deal with the few. Or even a many, but not the most. Does that make sense? Because many times that's what happens. They try to do a gotcha. Ask you a moral, difficult question like crazy that happens once every 500 years and say, so there, that can't be right. Instead of saying, no, for the most part, this is how human nature acts. Once in a while, because of original sin, it acts differently. And then we do our best, but we don't change the principles. Okay?
Thank you. That actually gets to one of the student questions that was repeated over and over, which was, what responsibilities do Catholics have, and I think you're saying all human beings have, when it comes to these policies and informing and forming our consciences? So thank you.
That's why we have to be involved in the political process. I beg all of you. It's too easy to say, it's a mess, I'm done with it. We have to stay involved and stay educated and talk to our legislators and Make sure you're going to debates and reading about and asking those questions of candidates and holding them accountable, right? And not just saying, it's still our best system. I haven't seen a better one, right? But can it get off track? Yes. And the worst thing we could do as American citizens is nothing, and to not be a part of the process, the political process. Because then the other ones, then you're going to get, I keep saying this, and you said it's a dilemma. And I'm not talking about any particular person. We get who we vote for. I'm just saying. Right? So, we don't have, so anyway.
Thank you. I'm very mindful of time, and as you all are aware, although the event is ending, this conversation is certainly not. So I want to thank you all so much for being here, and I especially want to thank our panelists for taking the time. And I promise you, Bishop, this will be the last thing we ask of you tonight. But I would like to invite Bishop Better to offer a blessing for us as we end our evening.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we ask that you send a fresh outpouring of your Holy Spirit to be with us. Give us the gifts that Solomon asked for: understanding and wisdom. Use us as your instruments. Bless our country, mend her every flaw. Watch over all those in our world who suffer, and help us to see one another. And may this Lent make us more and more into the saints you are calling us to be. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine on you. May he be gracious to you and grant you peace. And may Almighty God bless all who are gathered here, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good night. Thanks, God. Clap for our